Hello and welcome. Welcome, everyone. I'm going to take a few seconds to let our attendees fill in. It's nice to see a great big crowd coming today. If you are here for a discussion and interview with Farley Elliott, who participated in Alta's cover story, we're going to talk about 10 regional guides to California, secret spots off the beaten path. You are absolutely in the right place. And welcome. Before we get started, I'm going to just kind of do my spiel. Thank you for joining us at Alta Live. This is the digital interview series we do here at Alta Journal. I'm Beth Spotswood. I'm Alta's digital editor. And today I am so excited to welcome Alta Journal contributor Farley Elliott. Farley is the senior editor of Eater LA, as well as the author of Los Angeles Street Food, A History from Tamaleros to Taco Trucks. He also wrote the Alta Summer 2021 cover story. We've got 10 regional guides to the best of the Hidden West, from the Northern California coast to San Diego and almost everywhere in between. We're going to talk to Farley for about 30 minutes today, and we're going to get as we're talking, please use the chat feature to share. First of all, tell us where you're tuning in from today. I think Farley's in LA. I'm in Nevada, California. It's always fun to see where everyone is zooming in from. But please also share your ideas as we talk about hidden spots throughout California. I want to hear what you think. We can talk to Farley about those, find out why he refused to include them in his lists. If you are unfamiliar with Alta Journal, we are an award-winning quarterly magazine and website focused on California and the West. If you like what we do here today, including articles like Farley's, which not only come in this beautiful magazine, but we have a map that we're gonna get to and talk about, all inspired by these 10 lists. I can't fold a map. I was born in the late 70s. But anyway, we're going to record this interview today as well and email it to everyone. So if you like what we do, please check out Alta. Our new issue is all about art. But let's not talk about art. Let's talk about hidden, secret, magnificent California. Farley, welcome. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me, Beth. I couldn't be more excited to be here. Also, one of my favorite publications, and talking about myself, one of my favorite pastimes.
Okay, well, it looks like we have people from all over the country, but Maryland, hi, Maryland, Pennsylvania, New York City, a lot of California, Washington. Welcome, Kauai. Jealous. Wow. Okay, but we're going to talk about California today. Farley, what are your California qualifications? Why do you get to write the list?
Well, I'm not a native Californian, so I'll put that out there now. Anybody who wants to be mean to me in the chats, please feel free. But I think in some ways that offers me the opportunity to think even more broadly and more deeply about the state of California. I choose to live here and have for about 2 decades because I love this place. I'll be perfectly honest. The second time I was ever on an airplane was when I was flying out to California to visit a friend. And while on that trip along the Central Coast, I so fell in love with the state that I moved back to New York State. I took a flight back to New York State and then said, I'm going to move to California, and moved out about a month later. That's all it took, was really 2 weeks of being in California before I figured it should be the rest of my life. And I couldn't be happier about that decision.
And so having moved here, you've we were talking earlier and you described yourself as, for years, you've been the guy at the cocktail party who finds himself in a corner with a crowd of people and you're just dying to reveal all of these secret pockets of California. Have you always loved going off the beaten path and finding little treasures that the rest of us might not know about?
Absolutely, yeah. You know, in my day-to-day job, I talk about restaurants and food, mostly in Southern California, although I do tend to travel around a little bit with my job at Eater. And within that, I'm a real believer that food is great, but ultimately it's the stories that resonate long-term with people. It's the little nuances. It's the neighborhood spot that only you and your friends know about and you love to share with others. That act of sharing is really what drives me. And I have such a deep reverence for the history of this state that anytime I have the opportunity to leave Los Angeles or Southern California, go explore, I really try to take up that opportunity because I just think there's always more to be seen and more to be talked about. So yes, I am definitely the person at the cocktail party who's got you cornered by the fridge with a cup in his hand and he's just screaming about the beauties of Inyo County or whatever.
Screaming.
Just loud. Yeah. Well, the music's going, you know.
Okay, so in this kind of special section of the summer 2021 issue of Alta, which you can buy online if you haven't already gotten it, you've broken down California into 10 regions: North Coast, Gold Country, Owens Valley, Bay Area, Central Coast, Central Valley, Sierra Nevada, the deserts, LA, and San Diego. And within each of those, you have about 5 spots that perhaps we might not know about, or that are particularly special to you. 2 questions kind of here. How were the WPA guides of the early 20th century kind of inspiring of this project? And how did you break it down? This is a gigantic state. What was your process like?
Yeah, it's certainly no easy task trying to designate the state into about 50 or so total different disparate points. Ultimately worked with the editors to try to identify different regions that we thought people might be tackling in any given trip. And that made it a little bit more bite-sized. So once you're talking about, say, Los Angeles or the deserts, which is its own massive geographical region, you're able to kind of pinpoint within that places that have spoken to me over the years, places that I think speak to some of the Alta readership, or just that the general viewership might not necessarily know about it. And drilling down and getting deep with that sort of stuff is right in my forte and my wheelhouse. And to your question about the WPA maps, I think it's become more important than ever during the past year and a half for people, when they have the ability and access, to get outdoors as much as possible. We don't have to live just within the 4 walls of our apartments or our homes during the pandemic. I think there's a safe way to become comfortable with the outdoors in California. And I've really tried to model the map that we actually physically built for this issue to be representative of the different geographical areas, and hopefully keep you close to home if you need that as well. So you can pick a little spot, pick 1 or 2 places, and maybe knock a few off in the summer and really make them seem doable, instead of, as you said, California just being a massive state.
Sure. Just to kind of add a visual element as we talk, I've put together a little slideshow that I would like to share with everyone. And I've just kind of selected 1 spot in each of these 10 guides. So here we go. So can you just take us through, I figured, let's go through each of these and kind of tell us, like, why did this make the cut? This is the North Coast, and this is the radar station.
Yeah, it's radar station B71. It's kind of a small little hidden, very much out of the way part of California, that sort of northwest corner. And this actually is built, it looks just kind of, for the most part, like a regular barn or something. It was built to be a radar station during World War II, when there was a lot of fear of Japanese occupation or invasion coming from the West Coast. And so this was made to look like a farmhouse along the water that actually held radar equipment that would be able to spot incoming airplanes, pick up radio chatter, and things like that. I think we often don't think enough about California's coastal role when it comes to World War II, especially in the latter years. And a place like this is a great reminder of how California can just have a bounty of diversity across the spectrum. We have the gold rush, we have World War II, we have weird, quirky art out in the desert. Where else can you go and have a state this large that feels this impactful at so many different points in history?
You had a number of places that represent California's not so pleasant history. Included on the list was a Japanese internment camp that we can still see. Why was it important to you to include spots like that aren't necessarily the Woolworth Cafe, but rather something a little bit sadder and more serious?
Well, I think, as with anything, and especially these days, context really matters. We can spend a lot of time looking at beautiful photos of the Eastern Sierras. We can spend a lot of time, figuring out how to best maximize our day at Disneyland. And those are all valuable in their own way. But the reality is that California, in its diversity, has gotten some things wrong, and devastatingly so in some sense. And I don't think I would have felt comfortable moving forward with a project this large without paying a little bit of homage to that. And I'm really thankful to Alta and the team for letting that opportunity shine through. There is a lot of beauty and a ton of fun on here, but not really referencing or acknowledging some of our darker spots in the past would be a real missed opportunity.
Yeah. All right, let's go to Gold Country. I Love that you included a very weird hardware store. This is Placerville Hardware. And I mean, one of the things that I think is perhaps so special and hopefully, was perhaps one of the points of this was to when in Placerville, and sometimes you're in Placerville, you got to check out Placerville Hardware, which dates back to 1852. How did you find this place? Why would you go in at a hardware store in Placerville? I'm glad that you did. So now we all know to go there. But even the guy standing there in his hat and his boots looks just worthy of a visit to a hardware store. Can you tell us about this place?
Well, first of all, I think the log line with this spot sells itself. It's the oldest hardware store west of the Mississippi. And so once you get that in your brain, if you're any kind of person like me, it just becomes a must stop destination. And I would say even more broadly, who doesn't love an old hardware store? I grew up in Northern New York in a town of 400 people, and there was one hardware store in our town. And the gentleman who ran it could, without moving from behind his desk, tell you where everything was. And I'm sure the people at this Placerville location feel exactly the same way. You go and pick up little baubles and trinkets and dusty corners, and there's a safe built into the wall. And it just really feels like a version of California that is so far removed from the coast, from the big buildings. It feels like history living, and it's still a vibrant and viable business for people who need it in that community. What's not to love?
Were you there for this photograph? Who is that man? And can we get
I
him for
was
Alta?
I was not, and I'll think about him every night before I go to sleep for the rest of my life.
Okay, Bay Area. I am a native Bay Arean. And I am delighted that you included the Musée Mécanique. Now, here's my question, and I think that this kind of speaks to a broader question about it. I'm like, oh, shoot, Farley, don't tell everyone about this adorable place, which is now at Pier 39 or the Fisherman's Wharf. I mean, it is. Right. It is in the tourist hotspot, but it is so special, and not that all unknown. Did you, as you were Musée Mécanique, for those that don't know, and you should, it's worth sharing, is a wonderful vintage arcade, and has all of these incredible kind of vintage arcade games, located in Fisherman's Wharf in San Francisco. Did you debate whether or not to include spaces that were special to you that, maybe you didn't want to tell thousands of people about?
That's a great question. I encounter this all the time in my day-to-day work, talking about restaurants and street food in particular. Ultimately, I err on the side of these are operating businesses. If you look at any business in America, they are trying to attract enough of a customer base in order to remain financially viable. That's a part of the game. And so not talking about a place, while it might be nice for me, I'm not ultimately the singular patron for the Musée Mécanique. I can't keep them in business myself. So the idea that I would not be a presentable opportunist to try to get them more business or more eyeballs feels a little short-sighted, I think. But to your broader point too, about them, being up by the water now in a relatively tourist area, I think that's kind of the beauty of California. We had a lot of fun with San Francisco and Los Angeles in particular regions for this map, because they are such densely populated and well-trafficked communities, of still finding places that feel a little bit off the beaten path. A lot of people are going to go, check out the seals at the water, but they're never going to step foot in here. So this is an opportunity for many right in their own backyards to still discover something new.
It's such a cool place. Recommend. What you didn't include, I'm going to chime in for our audience, and we're going to let our audience share their spots. My secret spot that you did not include in the Bay Area is San Quentin Beach. I don't know if you've ever been there.
I have not.
A beach. You kind of park where you would check in if you were a prisoner at San Quentin, or visiting someone. But it is a lovely hidden nook of a beach, and it's a treasure. Okay, this is a hot spring. Remind me where this is. I'm going through my list. But you have to hike like an exorbitant way to get here, if I'm not mistaken. This is the Sespe Hot Springs.
Yes.
17-mile hike, Farley.
Exactly. This is part of the greater Los Padres National Forest area, kind of due east of Ojai, just southeast of Santa Barbara, along the central coast. And within that greater national forest, there are a bunch of wilderness areas, including Sespe. And what's really, really beautiful about this is that it rewards the traveler who's willing to put in the work. If I'm going to San Francisco, the Musée Mécanique can become a thing that is a 1 hour stop off for me and part of a larger day. This hike, this hot spring requires attention and it requires focus outside of your usual routine. And I think that's what makes it pretty special, especially as we try to go about our days during this portion of the pandemic and figuring out maybe how to connect offline, get away from our screens, get out of our houses a little bit. It sounds like a daunting hike, and it certainly is, especially in the heat of the summer. But now this season and getting into winter, or especially spring when water levels are higher, you have a real chance to do a strenuous but not impossible hike to a place like this where you're going to have sections of beautiful hot springs essentially all to yourself.
But you would need to camp there, right? I mean,
Yeah,
I
I
don't know
mean,
how far someone can walk in a day, but 17 miles is not on my list.
yeah, it's definitely ideal for a camp, maybe even a couple of days if that's a setup for you. And again, the hike itself isn't that strenuous. It's long, but it's not a slog. And I will say, if you want to just dip your toes in or stop off at a few other places along the trail leading up to the final hot springs, you can do that as well. It is doable as a longer day trip. But for the real magic of it, I personally recommend doing the full trip and making a weekend out of it.
Oh boy. All right. Um, oh wait, where's this one? You're gonna have to, is this the Sierra?
Probably. It certainly looks like it.
I mean, I've kind of like gone through this list. Oh, this is the Weird Oil Museum. I'll get back to what those rocks were. I love that you included some quirky museums along the way. In fact, in Alta's first issue, I think it was, we included the Vibrator Museum, which did not make Farley's list, but is it located in San Francisco and is a sexual toy museum. How did you discover? I mean, this is really out in the middle of nowhere. And I agree that funky museums, even really small museums that are like a room, there's one in my neighborhood, are really interesting. What do you love about them?
So I think there's so much to love about them. One, they're probably encompassing a part of your community or some other community that you wouldn't naturally find, not only on guidebooks, which is why we chose to include it here, but in even general discourse. There's a ton of people who live in West Kern or Taft, Oildale, areas like that have probably never been here. And that's to say nothing of the Angelinos that live only about 90 minutes away. And so if you can pull somebody a little bit out of their comfort zone and show them something that they really aren't going to find somewhere else, especially because these old places don't necessarily have the opportunity to digitize or modernize, then I think that's really beautiful. And I would further say for this location, which is the West Kern Oil Museum outside of Taft, like this is a part of the greater Central Valley as it opens up towards the north that people aren't naturally traveling to. It is very rural, very agrarian, obviously oil rich and oil heavy. It's just kind of off that 166 that traverses between the 101 and the 5. And it's a part of California that people aren't naturally interacting with. And I think if you have the right mindset when you go there, you can really experience a part of the state that wouldn't have been meaningful to you, and you might end up falling in love with it. The Carrizo Plain is right nearby, and that's another example of wide open spaces that are reflective of the history of Los Angeles that people aren't interacting with in large numbers, as opposed to say like Yosemite.
Sure. Speaking of Yosemite, let's go back. That was the Sierra, and it was the Grover Hot Springs State Park.
Yeah, so this is a fun one, and it's a little tougher at the moment because it's up in Markleeville, and given the fires of late, there's still a lot of questions about the long-term viability, and that's something that I struggled with in building this map, and I struggle with as a person who enjoys the outdoors. How do we think conscientiously about our role in interaction with the outdoors and climate change? But assuming the hot springs are able to continue and Markleeville is able to be a vibrant community as it has been for many years, I think this is a great destination. It's super accessible as well. Just another example of how much geological and geothermal activity there is in California, and how places like this don't need to be a 17-mile hike away. If you're in that area, they can just sort of pop up on your radar and make for a fun afternoon, even with kids.
Was accessibility important to you when choosing some of these? In one of the pieces of feedback we got is that a number of our hidden spots in California, and perhaps that's just the nature of hidden spots, are difficult for people who have mobility issues or just like me and don't want to hike 17 miles to put my feet in water. But is that something that you considered at all?
Absolutely. I think that's a fair criticism as well. We think about mobility often in the restaurant space, especially with alfresco outdoor dining and all of that sort of stuff right now, but we don't think about it enough when it comes to the interaction with the outside world. There's generally a sense in the public land use space that we should be leaving things as pristine as possible while allowing some limited access almost exclusively to people with no mobility issues or actual hikers who are willing to go on long 17-mile journeys. And so I tried as much as possible with this map to also cover places that still have an ongoing, retail component, like the Placerville hardware store or some of the old hotels, or places that are even just accessible by car that you could drive through, like the old Amboy down by the desert. These are places that people can see from through their windshield, frankly, and they don't need to have large scale access. But ultimately, it's something that we need to think about all the time as we consider the way that we as humans interact with the outside world.
This is Alabama Hills, which is not in Alabama. Where
Correct.
is this? I've never even heard of this.
Oh, that's the biggest compliment
Gorgeous.
you could have paid to say that you've never heard of it. That's exactly what I'm looking for. So this is up the 395 in the Eastern Sierras, kind of between the backside of the Sierra Nevadas and the White Mountains that then move into Death Valley. Owens Valley is such a beautiful and historically rich place. The Alabama Hills outside of like Lone Pine, Bishop, if you've ever been through that area, not only is it some of the best bouldering for outdoor climbers that you can find in North America, it's also just open public land. And so you've got a ton of access through BLM rights to be able to come camp in between rocks like this. There's turnouts everywhere. It just makes for a fun weekend excursion, especially seasons like this when it's not too hot anymore. You could bring your family, bring your RV, all that sort of stuff. It's beautiful.
All right. This is a tunnel again, and something else I did not know about. A gentleman, you're going to have to remind me of his name, built this for reasons.
Burrow Schmidt, one of the many old coots who managed to make it out to the desert in search of gold and eventually lost their minds and started digging in all directions except down, apparently.
He just dug a cave and we can go wander in this. Is it safe?
Safe is a question mark. It hasn't collapsed.
Like there's a blood stain right here in the middle of like something happened.
I will say in my personal experience, having been to this tunnel, I'm a taller person. It doesn't feel that comfortable traversing the entire expanse while bent over. But yeah, it's ultimately pretty safe. I mean, it's a small tunnel built in a huge side of rock, and it does. I will give Mr. Schmidt a little bit of credit. It does eventually end at a little bit of a desert vista. I'm not sure it's that much better than what you would get simply from turning around at the entrance to the cave. But the idea that it's out there and that you have to kind of pull down this 7 miles of rocky dirt to get there is part of what really makes me enticed to tell people about it.
Okay, this is in LA. Now you're in Angelino now. I love that you selected a really weird museum in LA. Again, one I've never heard of. And this is the Museum of Obscure Technology.
The Museum of Jurassic
Technology. That you have a tip here. What happens when you've made your way through this museum? What happens?
Well, I should backtrack one step and say this is a museum in some ways in name only. All of the language you'll see presented at the museum itself really presents as not only being true to life and housing real artifacts, but maybe some kind of art installation. It's a little unclear as you walk through it what's real, what's been manufactured. And I think that's part of the journey, is just going through and accepting everything for what it is, and maybe even thinking about your interactions with traditional museums and what they might be telling you as a story. But yes, once you make it to the top of this multi-story building just outside of Culver City, there is an open atrium, birds fly around, tea. I mean, it's a really beautiful sign off to an afternoon spent at one of the quirkier places in Los Angeles.
So interesting. All right, we end, no shade to San Diego. Sometimes we get, mail saying, stop ignoring San Diego. Okay, now I included the Model Railroad Museum. I am a daughter of a model railroader.
Okay.
And it kind of reminds me of what I enjoy about so many of the places on your list, the quirky museums, the weird hardware stores. It are the people that you probably will encounter along the way. The guy or gal who runs this place has got to be a Christopher Guest worthy character.
Exactly. And I think that is, to your point about San Diego, part of that city's beauty as well. There is such a sense that it's right on the water. Maybe there's a military angle, but it's mostly, retirees and surfers all living together. But the truth is always much more colorful. You pull into the parking lot of this place, which is, basically in the center of town, and, people with bumper stickers that say, choo choo, here comes my railroad or whatever. Like, I love that it is a collecting place for so many oddballs from Southern California. And it is actually a really great representation for those people of something that they love. I mean, this has, I think maybe more train tracks than anywhere on the West Coast, something like that. I mean, it's just a really vibrant and boisterous and large place to go experience a personal and private passion.
All right, so let's get into some kind of suggestions from other people and see if I would like to see if anyone can stump Farley, if he's never been to any of these places. All right, so Lookout Point on Mount Diablo.
Oh yeah, never been. This sounds great though. I mean, anything with Mount Diablo in the name sounds dangerous and exciting. That's like that's outside of Sacramento, I believe.
Mount Diablo isn't that up here? That's up by me.
Yeah.
Bay Area, East Bay, Wyatt Earp's Gambling Hall in San Diego.
Whoa. No, see, this is what I want. We got listen, if you guys will have me, I'm ready for round 2 already.
Yes, this is so great. Sonol Water Temple. It's closed due to construction. I mean, that's one of the things. It's interesting that you created this list and this map at a time where we were probably less willing to get on airplanes to do our travel and more willing to hop in the car and go see a weird hardware store in Placerville, or in your case, hike 17 miles. I guess that wasn't by design. One of the things that is kind of, have you ever been a map before? Part of Farley's kind of guides here comes with this pull-out map. I have it California upside down. Of all of the places. Farley, what are you going to do with this? Is this framed in your house? What are you going to do with this map that you made?
I've sold out of every available copy within the greater Los Angeles area. So if you know me and you expect a Christmas present from me, guess what? It's coming your way.
Good. Bombay Beach, Salton Sea. Oh, the Salton Sea is a notoriously kind of weird spot. How there's a lot of historical components, not a lot of food from you. I gotta say, you're the senior editor of Eater LA. You did not include a ton of food for those of us who like to eat on a road trip.
I know. Well, I tried to branch out a little bit and convince myself that there's more to talk about, even on days when I holler at folks at a party talking about hot dogs instead of where to go spend time in the Bay Area or something. The truth is, all of these places, you've got pretty good access to food of some sort, even in the wilderness. The Sespe Hot Springs hike, you're right outside of Ojai. So there's a ton of access. And, we've got a lot of other ways to talk about those places, whether it's Eater or the San Francisco Chronicle, these little known spots that don't necessarily link themselves to food as obviously don't get as much recognition as a result, and that's part of what makes them really fun. I will say, if you look at like the Amargosa Opera House outside of Death Valley, right on the edge of Nevada, that's a working cafe and seasonal opera house where you can go have breakfast in the middle of nowhere and talk to some of the volunteers who run the place. And so there is food definitely to be had at a lot of these stops.
You did include, was it at an old luncheonette?
Yes. Oh my gosh. Woolworth Diner in Bakersfield is the last original and untouched Woolworth Diner anywhere in America. There are some that have been rebuilt or closed for years and returned to action. This one has been in continuous operation so far as we're aware since the beginning, and it's in downtown Bakersfield. And bringing it up now is actually a little bit prescient because the building that it was in was just sold over the summer, and there's some historians out there that are a little worried about the future of the Woolworth Diner. The current owners now have said that they do plan to keep it intact, but they're changing the antique mall that the Woolworth Diner is inside into office space. And so there's a lot more to come on that side, and Bakersfield is paying very close attention.
Lotus Land in Santa Barbara. Oh, did you have any Santa Barbara spots on your list?
We did not have any specific Santa Barbara spots. We had a couple in the general region, obviously the Channel Islands National Park, up in Cambria, Nitwit Ridge, which is one of an example of a few different places of kind of homegrown arts, almost like Burro Schmidt, where someone just is a little kooky and likes to dive deep down a rabbit hole of specific art installations, usually involving their home. That's one that I think is really personally pretty beautiful in Cambria, and you can kind of stumble upon if you're driving that level up the coast, but nothing in Santa Barbara specific unless you count that Wilderness Hot Springs Sespe.
When you obviously, you put together this huge list, we make a map, we do this big spread in the magazine. When you got it, were there any spots that you were kicking yourself that didn't make the list?
I mean, there's always going to be too many, and that was part of the joy and the pain of building something like this. Is you're only talking somewhere around 50 total locations for a state that's this massive. I would have loved to include much more of Northeast California, where I've only spent a very little bit of time, Crater, or not Crater Lake, but some of the different Gold Coast regions, like the Lava Beds National Monument and Lassen. I think those are really important parts of California that really do get overlooked. And when you get deep into the Central Valley, those communities are really, really insular, especially if they're on the agrarian side. And so they're a little more reticent to give up some of their secrets. But I think there's always more to say if you're willing to dig a little deeper.
We have lots of votes for Lotus Land, so note that. Bernie Falls, there's a request for a Farley Elliott Part 2, please. The town of Locke.
Ooh, I don't know Locke.
I don't know Locke either. What's Locke? The Chen Museum in Torrance. We've got a couple of funky museum suggestions here. The Museum of Making Music. Wow, winery on top of the San Andreas Fault. We talked about that a couple of weeks ago with Will Hurst and Paul Sappho.
That's right.
Do you think clearly there are enough. Do you have this? You said you're from upstate New York.
I am, yes.
Could you do the same? Do you just find places like this wherever you go? Could you, if there was a fabulous magazine in upstate New York like Alta, do a version for there? I mean, everywhere you go, are you seeking out?
Yeah, absolutely. And like I said, so much of it for me is about the story. It's about the journey of these places over time. I grew up about 20, 30 minutes south of the Canadian border, right where the St. Lawrence River opens up into Lake Ontario. That region is called the Thousand Islands region. And if anybody in America is familiar with the term Thousand Islands, it's because that's literally where Thousand Islands dressing is from. There's all of these islands and formerly, rich people homes in New York City. And so one of the chefs, John Jacob Astor, had his chef make this dressing and moved it back down to New York City to sell at the hotel. So, there's just endless amounts of quirky little flotsam and jetsam of ideas and stories and places. New Jersey in particular has had its own Weird New Jersey series for years and years. This is the sort of thing that is transferable anywhere in America. And that's part of what makes America so beautiful. Oh, I've been to the Bunny Museum, Sherry Mudd. It is kind of spooky. I think the Bunny Museum.
Wait, is it about bunnies, like rabbits?
It's like stuffed bunnies. It's like old pictures of bunny. I mean, it's a little intense in there.
And apparently very spooky.
Yes.
We could do this all day, and we should consider a Farley Elliott Part 2 because this is really fun and exciting. I do want to give a shout out to my California license plate bracelet. I'd also like to do an article one day on quirky California products that we can wear and buy.
Perfect.
You're in. First of all, everyone, this interview has been recorded. We're going to send you links to all of the things that we've talked about, or certainly do our best to. The wonderful Jessica on the Alta team is going to try and gather some links and has been doing so. We're going to send you a link to this interview. And with that, Farley, I'm so grateful not only for this beautiful work you've done in our summer issue, but for this really fun interview.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. And honestly, to the Alta team, I couldn't ask for a more better, perfect assignment, I should say, than to be able to talk about the state that I love and all of its quirks and wonders. And to all the people who tuned in today, thank you so much for all the great suggestions. I know I've always got more work to do, and so I'm looking forward to it.
Well, great. Thanks, everyone. Stay safe, happy adventures, and we'll see you next time. Take care.
Thanks.